Okay, all the official stuff is out of the way. I have nothing else I need to announce. So this morning, our guest speaker is Syd Bergsma. He is employee of Hope Mission. I asked him what his title was, and he's like, I don't know. So he does church engagement. So he works with Hope Mission on sort of bridging some of the gap between the parachurch organization of Hope Mission and the churches that support them and that are in the communities that they're working in. And so Syd is going to come up. Maybe his more important role that he's had is being part of the Turpin family. That's probably, at least here, maybe what he's better known for. He was also Chris's youth pastor once. This is all the trivia. This is all the trivia.
You're taking all my stuff.
Oh, this is all your material? Sorry, I'll
Go sit down. No. Here you go. Take that out of
Oh, you don't want this.
Oh, man. So now you know the secret that it's okay. It's okay. Yeah, I'm part of the clan of Cletus. So I go way, 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 way back. And most of you know Leanne here, or at least know of Leanne. So this is the one place where I'm Leanne's husband. Often Leanne laments the fact that we go places and she's Syd's wife. So she has status here, and I'm just kind of there. But I remember, I don't know if anybody here remembers Pastor Hogman. Way back, anybody remember Pastor Hogman? Yeah, a few of you, way back. Well, I remember back in 1989, were we married then? We got married then, yeah. So it might have been before that. But anyhow, I preached my very first sermon at the little white church way over there, past that way, whatever. I'm directionally challenged. You don't need to put that up yet. Oh, it's automatically, okay, kill the button. Anyway, I preached my very first sermon as part of my Bible school little thing. And I remember what I spoke on. I don't know, I'm not going to test Doris's memory here. But I remember, and Pastor Hogman was gracious enough to allow me to speak. And I spoke out of Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1, 2, and 3. And it says this: "Therefore, since we have such a large crowd of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside every hindrance and the sin that so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that lies before us, keeping our eyes on Jesus, the source and perfecter of our faith." I remember way back then, some of you are going to remember some of these people. These are the people I remember, and all of them have gone on and become part of the great cloud of witnesses as we look back on people that were faithful to Jesus to the very end. I remember Lena Crandall. Anybody remember Lena? Lovely lady. Fred Pegg, Ross and Ruth Stevens, and Hugh and Evelyn Stevens. And there was others there as well that have all gone on and have left, and they were faithful to Christ to the end of their life. And we can look back at them and go, that's what it looks like to follow Jesus to the very end. That's good. Well, since then, time has flown by. Leanne and I just finished 33 years of youth ministry in Edmonton in June. And so, yes, I was Chris's youth pastor. I knew Chris I met Chris, I think, when he was about grade 9. Back then, he was going to be a musician, and he had, I think it was like a purple velvet jacket that he would wear. And he was young. He had hair, all that kind of stuff. So Chris and I go way back, and he's a wonderful friend of mine. And so, as Andrew said, my current role is working at Hope Mission, downtown Edmonton. I call it Ground Zero with church engagement. And Andrew asked me, what's your title? Well, when I got my job, they offered me a position. I asked for a job description. They didn't have one. They said, basically, connect with churches. And so I'm still asking for a job description, and I still don't have one, which is kind of nice because I kind of get to make my job what I want it to be. But it's connecting people with what's going on. But I want to focus, before we kind of just do a little overview of what Hope Mission does, I want us to focus on the few words in that Hebrew passage about keeping our eyes on Jesus. We've just come through the Christmas season, and Janaea said tomorrow they're going to take all this stuff down and Christmas will be over. But I want to kind of go back and just look a little bit at the Christmas season, where we celebrate the miraculous entry of Jesus into the world. And we know that the nation of Israel had a belief that a deliverer would come to save them. And for the most part, they looked forward to a time when they would be delivered from being oppressed. And if you look back over their history, they had been oppressed as a people for a lot of their history. They were under the authority of others. And at the time of Jesus' birth, they were under the watchful, oppressive eye of the Roman Empire. They wanted a liberator, one who would take them from oppression to being the oppressor, or from servant to the master. And they wanted to be the rulers of their world, yet they had lived for the most part as the ruled. And in their experience and understanding of how the world worked, it would have to come by might and by power. Being bigger, being stronger was how the world had always worked and how it would continue to work. And it was the box that they lived in, and it was the only box that they knew. This was the world that the angel Gabriel came to Zechariah and told him that God was visibly on the move. Zechariah was the father of John the Baptist. That same angel would inform Mary that she was going to have a child, and that Gabriel informed her would be called the Son of God. Never in the history of the world had this happened before or since. Yet it was, for the most part, kind of kept quiet. There was no internet, believe it or not. When Ian was talking about this family that had gone to Madagascar, I was thinking right away, Madagascar, the DreamWorks movie. How many were thinking that? You actually probably didn't even know it's a real city in the world. Yeah. 2005, it was the first DreamWorks movie. I know that because Leanne Googled it just before I got up here. But there wasn't any internet to let all these miraculous little things be known around the planet. But God was clearly on the move, and he was orchestrating history to his will. At that time, the Roman Emperor Augustus decided on his own that he should take a census, a decree that would impact the whole Roman Empire, the most powerful empire. The most powerful man on the planet had a thought, little knowing that he was just a puppet doing the bidding of Almighty God. A census should be taken. The result, Joseph and Mary had to travel to Bethlehem to register. And that would be part of their historical understanding that Bethlehem had something to do with God's plan, that it had been written down way in the past, and it was starting to, Augustus was being used by God so that this would happen. That ensuing chaotic trip to Bethlehem and the unsettled birth of Jesus in a stable. Well, Joseph was trying to manage a real crisis. Now, when I have two kids, and we went to the Grey Nuns Hospital where we had an obstetrician, we had a nurse, we had everything there. I'm familiar a little bit with babies before that because I've always loved little kids. But you think back, Joseph probably didn't have a whole lot to do with cuddling babies, playing with the nieces or nephews. But all of a sudden, he's got a pregnant wife, and she's having a baby, and he's the only option for help. A little unsettling, I would say. While he's managing this crisis of this miraculous birth, there's an angel of the Lord who is out in the field or outside of Bethlehem there, and he makes an announcement to the shepherds that something miraculous had happened. And they come, stunned, bewildered, and hurrying in to see this child. Now, last week I was out near Millet, way out in the country. I'm doing a little work on a farmhouse out there for somebody. And as I was driving back, I stopped and I got out of my car and I looked up at the sky. There's no city lights. It was a dark night, but there was a little slice of the moon and it was so bright. The stars were bright. There was a lone dog barking off at somebody's house down the road there. And I thought, what would it have been like to be a shepherd out in the field, sitting there, listening to your herd, listening for any disruption that might be going on where a predator's coming in to, kind of get your little sheep. And all of a sudden, an angel just pops out of the sky like, whoa. And it says he makes an announcement. And then right after that announcement, there's a whole host of the heavenly army comes as a backdrop and they start singing, glory to God in the highest, and all that kind of stuff that we sing. Like, wow. That would be quite a thing. And they didn't stop. I don't know if they were running towards Bethlehem going, I wonder if they're going to believe what we're going to tell them, because it would be unbelievable. And then as fast as all these things start, they seem to stop. And the great waiting game begins. For Joseph, who was off to an awkward start as the father of Jesus, and a husband to Mary, I wonder how many times he might have thought, did this all really happen? For Mary, the same. She was a little bit more intimately tied into the story. And we see as they go along that there's another interaction. When Jesus was 12 years old, they go to Jerusalem to the temple there. They lose him. They go back. They can't find him for 3 days. They go back and they find him in the temple, and he's not being taught by the scholars, but the scholars are kind of sitting at Jesus' feet, a 12-year-old, and he is teaching them, and they're amazed. And as Mary and Joseph kind of find him and get him, it says Mary kind of pondered these things in her heart, like, okay, there is something different about Jesus. And it would reaffirm kind of all those things. And then there's silence. For 18 years after that, we don't read anything more about Jesus doing miracles or different stuff happening. It's just like the story kind of goes silent. And then when Jesus is about 30 years old, he begins his ministry. And he begins it by calling people to follow him. In particular, as we know them, the 12 disciples. He begins by calling a few men to follow him, and they would be his disciples. And for the next 3+ years, they would be his people, his trainees, the ones who would often wonder, who is this? What would it have been like to be connected to Jesus at the start of his ministry? What would it have been like to be picked as one of his followers? That would have been quite an honor. Back then, rabbis would pick people, or people would come to him and say, hey, can my son study under your tutelage? And they would say, well, is he really, really, really smart? Yeah, he is. Okay, do you have money so that you can pay me? Yeah, we have money. Okay. And the rabbi might think, okay, this guy is really bright. And as he grows in his learning, he's going to bring honor to me as his teacher that, oh, Glenn here is just like this amazing scholarly person. But that wasn't the people that Jesus picked. Jesus picked people that I often think of might have been skilled labor, like somebody who's working on the rigs. Or in the summertime, as you get stuck on the highway and they're paving, the people working the paving machines. Those kind of people were the ones that Jesus picked. So right off the bat, Jesus kind of goes off script. Now, if you've watched, I think it's Dallas Jenkins' series, The Chosen, anybody familiar with that one? I've enjoyed watching that one. And his take on Jesus' life. But he looks at Peter, and Peter's kind of an aggressive type A leader, elbowing his way towards power, prominence, and status. And in Peter's mind, significance. Jesus was there to be prominent and powerful in Peter's mind, and Peter was there to clear the way so that he could have it all kind of fall into place. So one of Peter's roles was to keep away some of the undesirables and outcasts and even children that might tarnish Jesus' reputation or just waste his time and slow his progress towards what Peter thought were the achievable goals. But Jesus just wasn't playing by the rules. Jesus was very different. And I love the stories of his encounters with people. And if we were to keep our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, then we better study him, learn from him, and then emulate him. I have a couple of favorites. Times when Jesus' disciples are baffled by his behavior and his disregard for how things are supposed to be, making his followers very uncomfortable as he interacted with people that were not going to help move the cause forward, and often with people whom society had little regard for and in fact looked down upon. The sick, the lame, the immoral, the insignificant. Jesus, from his disciples' eyes, was probably wasting his time and effort on people that were of little to no value to him or his perceived cause. And yet the person or people that Jesus interacted with didn't experience the undercurrent of negative emotions that the disciples and society in general would often have towards them. I'm always amazed that people were drawn to Jesus, and they could interact with Jesus and not feel like they were dirty or judged or anything like that. They were drawn towards them. So our little encounter that we're going to look at today just for a few minutes is the encounter in John 4 with the Samaritan woman. Now, Jesus and his team are walking through Samaria, a significant venture in and of itself. Jews did not like Samaritans. They disliked them, and the more self-righteous Jew would go around Samaria so that they wouldn't even have to go in and be defiled by this group of people that were kind of a mixed group. They weren't purely Jewish. They were Samaritans. There was a blend there, and so they were looked down on. And Jesus, not skirting around, he goes right through. And as he gets to the mid part of his day, lunchtime, he's thirsty, he's tired, it's hot, and he comes to Jacob's well. And he goes and he sits on this big well. And his disciples head off to go find food and different things in the town of Sychar. Well, if you look at a well in those days, it's probably about 5 feet wide. It had a big stone on top with a little hole in the middle, big enough to be able to put your bucket that you're going to draw water of down. You could put a little cloth over there and it would kind of keep the dirt and dust out of the water. And Jesus sits right there on the water, or on the well, and he sits there. A short time later, a solitary figure winds her way towards the well. This lady, we read, may not have had the best reputation in town. She may have found herself on the outside looking in when it came to the village women gathering in the cooler parts of the day, because you went in the cool of the day to go and get your water. That's when all the women would go. They connect, they talk, have a chit chat. But this lady is coming in the heat of the day. Why? She had a story. And it was maybe one that had pushed her out of the circle of the other ladies of the town. And she has an encounter with Jesus, and it's a very familiar story. So let's just look a little bit at the Samaritan woman. Now, if you want to read the whole story, it's quite long. It's in John chapter 4. You can read that this afternoon. But we find out that, things that we know about her is we don't know her name. It's the largest connection Jesus is having, or conversation Jesus is having with somebody in the Gospel of John, and yet it's to an unnamed person. Her encounter, so it's the longest one in the Gospel of John there. Let me just hop along here. She represents the lowest of the low. She was a woman in a society where men were kind of, the top. She was of a race that was traditionally despised by the Jews, and she lived in a society that had, basically she was an outcast because she was an immoral woman. She had been married 5 times, and she was now living with somebody who wasn't even her husband. And so she begins to have a conversation with Jesus, with the God of the universe. And Jesus uses everyday things to speak to her, and he paints a picture that she could understand. And here he uses water as he sits thirsty at the well. Jesus says, "Can I have a drink?" And so the encounter begins. And there's some verbal banter that leads eventually to spiritual transformation. Not just for this lady, but in a short time for the whole community that she's somewhat been ostracized from. And I get the sense as I read this story that Jesus is really enjoying the challenge that she puts forth. I sense that this lady had a little bit of spiciness to her. She had been maybe put down, looked down upon. She was an outcast, and yet she was still fighting for some dignity in her life. She wasn't going down without a fight. She had nothing to lose because she really didn't have anything. Initially, they start about Jesus needs a drink of water to quench his thirst. And they banter back and forth. And Jesus intentionally moves the conversation to speak of her spiritual thirst, the reservoir of her soul that she had been filling with life-draining choices. Her unhealthy relationships had alienated her from her community, and she had lived with the shame of being a used woman. She seems cut off from connection and maybe avoided a little bit, and maybe even at the well in the morning, a few snide remarks or slanderous pokes at her from the righteous people who populated her little village and the women who actually had a husband. It's always easy to judge others when our world seems correct. But also, the community had maybe pushed her away. They didn't want her kind too close to their kind, and they lived in kind of a livable tension. The self-righteous living in tension with the unrighteous. Both sides living, yet both sides not satisfied. One who knew she had blown it in life, and the others who were kind of living life, feeling like they kind of had it together. And as I said before, I'm always amazed at how the sinners were drawn to Jesus. The lady was not feeling judged by Jesus. She was drawn towards him. There's another story in Luke, and you're familiar with it, but Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was of a different, he had different issues. He was actually wealthy. He had status, but he was also kind of a crook and a criminal. And Jesus spends a whole day with Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus is drawn towards Jesus, and they spend the whole day together while others look on going, "Oh my goodness, why is he talking to this sinner?" And yet there seemed to be a really good, healthy connection between Zacchaeus and Jesus. And at the end of that story, something amazing happens, and Zacchaeus is transformed. Jesus leads her to some self-reflection. He's physically thirsty, but he can tell that she is spiritually thirsty. And there's a remedy for both. One would be reoccurring as Jesus experienced a drink of water, he would be satisfied, but then he would thirst again physically, because we all do. And that was just the normal part of life. But for her, there was a spiritual thirst that had a remedy, one that would last and satisfy not just for now, but into eternity. He would be the one who could satisfy her spiritual thirst forever. He is offering her something that no one else can offer her: salvation, or as he calls it, living water, life that goes beyond this temporal world and lasts forever. Jesus' message to her, as you follow through the story, was transformative. Once it was believed and her eyes were open and her soul satisfied, whoa, she had to tell somebody. Well, as she looked back over at the village there, All those people may not have looked on her favorably, but she still goes running towards them, and she tells them, come and see somebody who has living water. He's told me everything about me, of who I am, and he's got something. And so they come running out, and we read in the story that Jesus spends actually a couple days with them, and many people believe. Their lives were transformed as well. A wonderful story. So at the end of this story, I was reading through it again, and I'm like, I don't even know if Jesus ever got a glass of water or a thing of water from this lady, of living water, but she got something, and I'm sure he did get his thirst satisfied. It's cool. We're going to hop a little bit now over into, I work for Hope Mission. I've just been there since September, and I have met tons. I have met a lot of Samaritan women as I've interacted with different people at Hope Mission. We'll talk about some of those as we go along the way here. But Hope Mission began in 1929, offering soup in downtown Edmonton to hungry people in need, brought about by what was going on in the 30s? What was it called? The Great Depression. There was hungry people everywhere, physically hungry, and one of the pastors in town decided to start a soup kitchen, sort of, to feed people physically, but also to feed them spiritually and offer them living water. We got a video here we're going to play, and then we'll just kind of hop through a little bit of what Hope Mission does on a bigger picture. So this here is the building that I work out of. If you look to the far right on the third floor up, that's one of our offices that we work out of there. And Max works down there as well. I see Max almost every day. That's a good day. He walks the hallways where I work, and he works in logistics, right, Max? Is that the title? Yeah. Yeah. So he's dragging stuff all over the place, moving things around. If we don't have audio, this is a story of a lady who was struggling. You see the little, it looks like an ambulance at the front there. That is one of our rescue vans. Somebody called, I think they called 211, and the rescue van went out and talked to her. And as they talked to her, they were able to get sound. Maybe not. That's okay. Don't worry about it. So they ended up picking her up, taking her and getting her some help. And then she got into our programs and her journey with towards Jesus began and resulted in Jesus doing stuff. So one of the things Hope Mission does here we have a picture of meals being provided in different places. This guy is talking that his family lives on a budget. He's got a great little voice and a budget, and they get food, and it helps a lot. And here's some of our many volunteers serving, and this could be in a maybe not so much downtown, but in different places. We'll talk a little bit about that. That's a van that Max would drive around town. This is Camp Hope down in Calgary, and then you saw Bethany Homes there. We'll talk about these a little bit more. Our nursing section, low mobility needs, lots of wheelchairs. And then we had 4 Christmas banquets this year. And that's where our clients come in, sit at a table. It's all set up real nice. And they get served by people. Ultimately, this is Colin. He's currently in our program. And God's doing something great in his world, and he's finding freedom for the first time. There we go.
Put me back on the path that gave me hope, so I am very thankful for Hope. for giving me back my life.
There you go. Good. All right. Now I've got a little button here, which we will go to our PowerPoint and we'll just kind of talk through some of the things. There we go. So that is, we call it Ground Zero of Hope Mission downtown. And, oh, no, I didn't. We're going back. It might be looping. I don't know. There, I'll go. I pushed the button that time. Is that okay? All right. I'll keep going back on it. So, I have to talk really fast, but I've got to stretch out this thing so it lasts the whole sermon time. Okay, this is the main building here. We have our kitchen down below. I went and looked at our little kitchen thing, and this last week we got really close to 3,000 meals coming out of this kitchen each day. We're at 2,914, 2,908, and these, they feed meals, breakfast, lunch, and supper, except for on the weekend, they kind of do a brunch and a supper there. So that kitchen is pumping out stuff all the time. On the second floor, we have a women's shelter. And on the far end, if you went down there, there's what we would call our intox wing. And that's if somebody comes to Hope Mission and they're very inebriated, they're high, they need a place. They would be able to get a place in there for the night. That one has a little bit more staff watching because one of the issues is overdoses. As everybody here, I'm sure, has heard of overdoses. They happen there all the time. We'll talk a little bit more about those numbers in a second. My office is upstairs. One of the gentlemen that I talk to all the time that we take care of is, his name is JB. He's from Africa. He came here, I think he said he was working on his PhD program, so a very smart guy. He's probably in his early 40s. And he came here, he was in Montreal working on his PhD, ended up coming to Edmonton. While he was in Edmonton, he had a significant stroke. So he knows nobody knows him. He finds himself in the hospital, and seriously, his right arm is just like, it's useless. And it's been like that way for 4 or 5 months since he had his stroke. So where does he go when he gets released from the hospital? He needs a place to stay, a place where he can get cared for and move towards health and care. So he actually has a room up on the 3rd floor, and he gets help there by therapists and those kind of things, so that he can gain some moving towards life that can work for him a little bit better. So that's one of the things, as many other things. This is our latest building, the Herb Jameson Center. This one here is our men's shelter. So there will be about 400, we're looping again. 400 people will be sleeping in there. On the main floor, it's the only building or shelter in Edmonton that has low mobility. So if you happen to go into the Royal Alec, maybe you're living on Aish, you're struggling a little bit, you have a 3rd floor apartment, a walk-up apartment, you go in, maybe you haven't been taking care of yourself, and you end up losing a limb. We see that. You're diabetic, whatever, you end up losing a limb. You come out, and now you need a lot of care. You can go into our low mobility care. So we see wheelchairs, walkers, crutches, canes. There's 80 beds on the bottom there, and you can get cared for there. And then they will work towards finding you a better living arrangement as you're able to. So we have a team called our diversion team. Last year, we housed over 700 different people that were on the streets. Now, you might think, or I'll just give you some numbers. The last 3 weeks, we've broken numbers for people staying in a Hope Mission shelter. So I think last week we hit 1,179 people stayed in a Hope Mission shelter in Edmonton on one of our evenings. That's a lot. Now you might think, as I did, when I first started working there, it's like all these people are chronically homeless. They're all drug addicts, and they're all not great people. Or people with challenges that you might have challenges with you when you interact with them. There's about 35% of our clients are chronically homeless. They've been homeless for more than 90 days. Last year, we had over 9,000 different people sleep in our shelters. But a lot of those, the majority, stay for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 2 weeks, until they find a better thing. One of the stories that Ryan, one of my coworkers, tells is he had a gentleman come in and he had lost his job. He was kind of being a jerk at home to his wife and kids. And so she kicked his butt out onto the street because she wasn't going to put up with that. He had no money, no credit cards that were available or anything like that. Where does he go? He's never been on the street in his life. He's whatever, in his mid-30s. So he comes in there, he's embarrassed. And what happens is when you come in to stay for an evening, you get put into the computer and they say, okay, so have you ever used a shelter before? Nope. So all the beds are numbered. So they know that in bed number 14 is George, and this is George's first night in a shelter. So one of our workers would go and meet with George, supper time, and go, so George, what's going on? Like, tell me your story and let's help you out. Well, this gentleman came during the day, they found out. And so Ryan was talking to him and he's like, you've never been here? He's like, oh, he's all distraught and distressed. And he's like, do you have any family in town? He's like, well, I have a brother who lives in St. Albert. Okay. Well, what's your relationship like with your brother? Oh, my brother loves me. Does your brother know you're here? Oh, no, I'd be so embarrassed. He's like, what would your brother think, or what would you think if you were living in your nice house in St. Albert and your brother was down here looking for a bed? He's like, oh man, that would be terrible. I'd do something. He's like, sounds like we need to call your brother. So they called his brother, and within a couple hours, his brother had come in to pick him up, took him to his house in St. Albert, where he can have a better place to kind of get life moving a little bit forward. So that gentleman didn't have to spend one night in a shelter, which was good. The goal is not to live here. The goal is to give you a better tomorrow than you're having today. Here's Amanda, one of our amazing nurses. And here's one of our community members who is getting great care. We have paramedics and nurses that are on during the day. We're trying to get funding so that we can have paramedics on during the nighttime because overdoses are real. And there's many of them. I was talking to Liz, our nursing department head, and as we were giving a tour to somebody, and I said, how many overdoses would you kind of do in a 12-hour period? Now, our paramedics, they kind of look after the whole Hope Mission District, so it's not just in the building, around the building, it's a block over or so. So in one shift, last week, they had 36 overdoses. That's a lot. I saw one on Friday that we had a guy who wasn't breathing for 15 minutes and they were able to bring him back. And it was his second overdose of the day. So a lot of people have significant mental health issues, and it's either medicated by an addiction. Like, those two go together quite a bit. So when you're dealing with people who are maybe on the street, you're not just dealing with somebody who's addicted, but you're dealing with somebody who's got some significant, possibly, mental health challenges. Amanda, I love her. She's just they just care so deeply for their clients that they work with, helping them out. This is what that room looks like. So obviously it's not a 5-star hotel, and you really don't want to stay here. But for many, it's the last option. This here is our women's shelter. Oh, we're going to go there. Our women's shelter is about 7 blocks away from there. It used to be the old Intox for AHS. And we're going to back up there. One of the things Hope Mission does is they're seeking to create some dignity. So you notice the little walls around the beds there, so that you maybe feel like you got a little bit of privacy and a little bit of safety. This is actually a much different feel to it than our main downtown one. There's about 80. At 80, it's full. I think we have about 83 women in there staying there right now. And they get cared for. They're coming out of abusive relationships, all sorts of things. And we have people that are caring for them. Now, I love this picture because the lady on the left and the lady on the right both used to be, well, the lady on the right there, the lady on the left, she's a significant addiction in her world, and she's found freedom in Christ. And now she works at Hope Mission with people that were like her. I talked to the lady on the right in December, and I thought she was one of our nurses. And so I was just asking her a few questions, and she goes, no, I work at Care Center. I'm an intake worker, and she works with the women that come in that are struggling. And she's like, I lived on the street for years, and now she met Jesus, and she's doing amazing. And now she works helping others that are coming off the street. Great things. This here is our rescue vans. So if you're in the city, I don't know if it works in Wetaskiwin. We'll go back here for a sec. But this one here if somebody's having a non-medical emergency, you can call 211 and it's kind of like it goes to a central place and then it gets spread out. There's quite a few. We have 5 of these operating in Edmonton, and there's others, Boyle Street and other places have 211 vans as well. And they will go help somebody who's in distress. They'll do a wellness check. They'll take them to a shelter. They'll transport them from the hospital if they've been in there back to a shelter, and they care for them. And as you saw the numbers there last year, we responded to 9,187 calls. That probably would have been called, those people would have been called for a 911 response, which would be an ambulance, which is quite expensive. So great work there. On your left here is our men's recovery. So Hope Mission works in 3 areas. They have crisis emergency care, then they have recovery, and then we have prevention. So this is part of our recovery program. On the left here, we have our men's breakout program. Right now we have 70 men in there who are going through about a year-long program. It can fluctuate a little bit time-wise, but it's at least a year. And they're people who are coming off of addictions. Well, they're off of it, and they're learning how to live life as a non-addicted person, getting all the skills they might need, the support they need. And it's very, very, Jesus is mentioned every day in our programs. We actually believe that Jesus is the answer. We need lots of other supports, but Jesus is the one who's going to give you ultimate freedom, just like the woman at the well. On the right-hand side is our Wellspring. That is our women's recovery program. Right now, it is full. We have 30 ladies in there who are going through. I get to go. They graduate about. There's 4 different phases, and I get invited to come and go to their graduation. So I went to a couple, and I sat beside a mom and a dad, and their daughter was going through the program. They get up and they tell their story. They pick a Jesus song, they play it, and then people speak positive words towards them, and then they move to the next level. And this gentleman beside me, he looked at me and he goes, last time I came, because his daughter's in the program, so he's graduated through the thing. He's like, last time I came and I forgot to bring my box of Kleenex, but this time I'm ready. And he had his box of Kleenex because he was going to bawl his eyes out watching what God had done in his daughter's life, because it was changing forever, because somebody's there doing this kind of stuff. So good. Yeah. Then we have prevention. In 2023, we made over 289,000 bag lunches for hungry tummies in schools. In schools, we are all along the schools, along the strip here, from Camrose to Buck Lake. We're in schools, and this is for. It's a basic bag lunch. It's nothing super fancy, but it's a child can have a lunch that comes to school that hasn't had breakfast and isn't going to eat lunch? How do you learn if your tummy is growling louder than the teacher's voice? So all those sandwiches are made by volunteers. And they make them out at Bethany Homes. They make them in Edmonton. They make them in Calgary. They make them in Red Deer. And they kind of go out all over the place. So that's prevention. How do you measure if prevention is successful? I don't think you can. But the ultimate goal is if you can help kids get educated, stay stable, and be loved and cared for by people, you don't know how many down the road you're going to impact their life. One of the things as we run programs in schools, we're starting, it's been around for a while. COVID kind of shut down a lot of stuff, but Kids in Action. So if you come to our lunch program, you get invited to come and join after school. In some of the schools, a program where you get to talk a little bit more freely about Jesus and impact kids' lives. Out of those kids, they get invited to go to a camp. We're going to back up just a sec so I can finish my little story. You get invited to go to camp. So we have Camp Hope and Camp Brightwood Camp, and there you get a full dose of Jesus, and great things can happen there. You might be familiar with Bethany Homes. How many are familiar with Bethany Homes? Yeah, look at all that. Okay, you might even know more details about this than I do. But last year, or the last 2 years, there's been about 300 kids each year that have come through a program. One of the stories we heard from our horse wrangler lady there, she's the one I think wearing the hat in the back. They offer this program during the school time. So the kids come out for 2 hours over an 8-week period, and they learn how to ride and take care of a horse. And she told us the story of this one little girl, and I think you get recommended by the teacher, like, okay, Jimmy's struggling, or Brenda, she's having a hard time. She'd be a good candidate for this. She's shy. She just looks at the floor all day. She doesn't have any friends, and she's a flower against the wall. Nobody sees her, and she just wants to hide. So one little girl that came, probably a little 60-pounder, she comes out there, and the very first day of her thing, she wouldn't even go near the horse. She was terrified. The next time she came out, she got on the little step-up block, but she didn't get on the horse. The next time she came out, she actually got on the horse and sat on this big 1,000-pound animal. By the end of her 8 weeks, she by herself was riding this horse, trotting it around through the little course that they had. What does that do to a child who now has confidence to control a big horse as a little person? It does huge stuff in helping them maybe manage some of the other challenges that they're having in their life. So just some good things that are going on there. There's Brightwood. That one's out near near Entwistle. Yeah, cool little ranch. And so we thank you, donors and volunteers. You are life changers. So that's all we got. You can shut that one down. So my last little question here. Often in the world of working with people who are challenging, Leanne and I live in Mill Woods, but everybody I've talked to in the city of Edmonton has people now wandering through their neighborhoods that weren't there 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago. They're all over the place. How do you interact with them? How do I interact with them? Leanne and I have got some great stories of people that we've connected with just in our neighborhood that we've been able to just bring some light to their day. So I share this last little thing. Everybody knows what a lighthouse is, right? Lighthouse up there in the sky, and on the top is a light, a bright light. And what is that light there for? Yeah, it's a light bulb, right? For boats. Sorry, did you say boats? Yes, you are absolutely right. You are there, or that lighthouse is there, so that people out there who are in the storms of life can look to a light and see the light. And as followers of Christ, we are to be the light of the world that people can look to and be drawn to, so they can be drawn safely towards the light. Now, if you notice the bottom of a lighthouse, what's happening at the bottom of a lighthouse? absolute turmoil, waves crashing all over the place. It's chaos. It's crazy. And I look at Hope Mission, it's like, that's the world that I work in and that I live in. There's turmoil, there's craziness, there's all sorts of stuff. And yet, as a mission, we are the ones, as others are, that are holding up a light saying, people, there is hope that can get you out of the turmoil here at the bottom of the lighthouse in the everyday of life. Look to Jesus, and you can find hope there, and he will bring you to a better place if you allow him.